to another stream of us analyzing the lore, the game, and the story of Bloodborne while comparing the English text to what I have retranslated from the Japanese version of the game. And yesterday we went ahead and finished up all the NPC quest lines in Central Yarnum by talking to the lonely old lady. We talked to Father Gascoigne's daughter and sent her to Erden Chapel, or we attempted to, and she was tragically killed along the way by a man-eater pig. And after that, we explored the first area of Cathedral Ward, picked up the monocular, and then we headed to Old Yarnum, and we did everything there is to do there. We killed Jura, as well as the blood-starved beast. So at the end of the last stream, we did kill that blood-starved beast, and we picked up the Thumro Chalice, and I've not read that description yet, partially because it'll tie a little bit into what Gehrman was talking about earlier on the last episode about what kind of blood it has. And I suppose that isn't like a full connection here, but Gehrman is back in the workshop, and he'll have new dialogue for us. So after I talk to him, I'll just go ahead and look at that item and talk about it more.
The healing church and the blood ministers who belong to it were once guardians of the hunters in the times of the hunter Ludwig. They worked and forged weapons in their unique workshop. Today, most ministers don't recall the hunters, but they have much to offer you. And so, heed the message of your forebears. Ascend to Erden Chapel.
So there is a few differences in his Japanese text for that. The final line is probably like the most incorrect and is more of an actual mistranslation, I would argue, than a lot of the other more like flavorful kind of differences or things that are possibly not updated from the original Japanese text into English. And so instead of saying ascend to Erden Chapel, it should be more likely that he's saying to us to go ascend Erden Chapel, which makes sense. Once we go into the chapel and go off into the side area, we will climb above it, and that's where we enter the Healing Church workshop from. The other point that I wanted to talk about was he mentions that the Healing Church's blood ministers were once the guardians of hunters. I think that's a very piece of information to have, because as we're like the kind of dreaming hunter, we can't necessarily die for a night, and it doesn't really seem like hunters really need protection out on the night of the hunt. So I do wonder whether or not the Healing Church was trying to control the hunters and what they would access on nights of the hunts. We don't get a ton of information beyond that. This does reestablish that Ludwig was the first Healing Church hunter, and it seems as though that the Healing Church has kind of forgotten their original role of being like the kind of guardians or protectors for hunters. Although I think that's pretty similar in the English version as well.
Ascend to Erden Chapel. From there, you will find the church workshop.
And that's pretty much all he'll have to say for now.
Ascend.
And so the last time we talked to him, he told us to go essentially to Old Yarnum to look for a chalice, so that way we could go into the chalice dungeons and things like that. I won't really be exploring the chalice dungeons on these streams, just because it's a little bit of a grind. It gets really repetitive. It's something easier to do on like a different character that's already like gotten the deeper portions of them unlocked. So if I were to do it, it would probably be on a different character, just to kind of answer some community questions. So let's go ahead and look back at that Thumro Chalice. And this is a ritual chalice found in the Church of the Good Chalice, used in a ritual at the Tomb Altar in the Hunter's Dream to break the seal of the old underground labyrinth. Let the chalice reveal the tomb of the gods, let blood be the hunter's nourishment, and let ye partake in communion. Let me look at Gehrman's dialogue just to compare them. That final, or like the final two paragraphs right there, are the same in Japanese from the Stumer Chalice and part of the Gehrman's dialogue. I did bring that up the last time we talked to him, and he says, and that final line is a little bit different. And let ye partake in communion. It makes more sense that Gehrman would say like where hunters partake in communion, it flows a bit more naturally. The translators might not have realized that those were the kind of same text being reused in different locations. So I don't really fault them. It's really easy to make those kinds of, I wouldn't even really call it a mistakes, but maybe just like overlooking what kind of materials you're working with. I was a bit mistaken yesterday because Herbert was in here and he was asking me about the holy body in reference to part of Alfred's text, and I think Gehrman says something about it as well. Oh no, it's just in this dialogue right here where he's talking about the Thumer chalice, like the holy body part is from this description. And so for some reason I was thinking like the Hyrdio part of the communion rune, like that's the name of it in Japanese. I was thinking that was Eucharist in Japanese, but the communion rune's name essentially just means bestowment, and so I was just kind of confusing the two. Like Seitai literally is like holy body, and that's also apparently a term that they use for the Eucharist in Japanese, like the wine and the I can't think of what they're called, like the wafers that represent like the blood and body of Christ. Um, just as a bit of a no, I'm not terribly familiar with Catholic sacraments and things like that, especially in Japanese. So if I do make mistakes or you guys do have more questions about that, please feel free to bring them up or just leave me a comment about them as well. I do this kind of a bit as a learning process for myself as well, so I do enjoy those kind of conversations, even just about kind of trivial semantics at times. So, um, looking back at this description for the chalice itself, let's see. A holy chalice exposes the graves of gods. Its blood becomes the sustenance of hunters. Receive communion is what is more closely literally translated to in Japanese. And I talked about this with Gehrman's dialogue yesterday. I believe the blood he's referring to is the like ritual blood that we use to satiate these vessels and access the tombs of the gods. And I think there's a very good chance that ritual blood is the same thing as cold blood. It is the same thing as old blood, etc., etc. And this is pretty minor, but some people might enjoy it. The term that they use for like the chalice itself is seihai in Japanese, which is literally like holy grail. And I completely understand why they didn't call it like a Thumerian holy grail, because in the West we have the kind of Arthurian tradition of thinking that the holy grail is related to Jesus, and it's a very like loaded term on its own. So I'm perfectly fine with them calling it like a Thumeru chalice. Maybe it is a little bit unfortunate that you don't get that idea that it's a holy chalice, but it's not terribly important, I don't think, just because you kind of get that idea with the role of the chalices and the descriptions as well. So that'll conclude that. So I'm thinking next we'll go into the Cathedral Ward, ascend the Healing Church Workshop, and then go through that like back section of Cathedral Ward, and then get snatched by one of the kidnappers on our way back. So we are back in Cathedral Ward. I don't think the NPCs will have anything different to say after beating the Blood-Starved Beast, but just for sake of completion, let's check them out.
Ah, the hunter. Alive and well, are ya? This here's a safe place. Stay as long as you like. But next time you're out on a hunt, remember what I asked. If you find any sane survivors, tell them to seek shelter at Erdon Chapel. Because there's nothing to fear here.
So that's pretty much the same. I don't remember if I mentioned it when he talked about like the incense before that wards off beasts, but the incense that they use is made out of like bones and possibly like the cremated remains of people. I don't think you can really see the bones here, but maybe we can. Okay, yeah. So there are like these kind of like spinal type bones in these urns, and these are kind of what is used in this area to keep away the beasts, which is pretty interesting. And then the lonely old deer should still say the same stuff and just kind of berate us as per normal.
You! Stay away from me! I know all your tricks.
And I forgot to do it in this run as well, but I didn't show off like in the back of this area there wasn't a snatcher before we came here, but now there will be. This is a church servant, so I'm not too worried about him. And so, like, back behind this building, there's a corpse over there and a snatcher. I'm not gonna try to get killed quite yet, or snatched quite yet, but on a return trip, it's probably where I'm going to head to. So this door was closed before, and this is part of Erdon Chapel still, obviously, and we get this little elevator which literally allows us to ascend Erdon Chapel. There's a little kind of a secret door. Allows us to get some hidden treasure of the church. So in this chest, we have a Formless Erdon rune. I think our first rune of this playthrough. So this is Formless Erdon, a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. The Great One Erdon, lacking form, exists only in voice, and is symbolized by this rune. Those who memorize it enjoy a larger supply of Quicksilver bullets. Human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade and the essence of the Formless Great One, Erdon. Both Erdon and his inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. There is a lot of mystery really surrounding Erdon and his role in the game. We have very, very little information about him. We've gotten maybe like 4 descriptions in total which refer to him. So for a kind of great one that we don't encounter, he does seem to have a pretty large role, and a lot of players want to know more about it. The way that I try to Formless Erdon is probably more related to the blood, and the formlessness in that of like liquid might be what they're trying to get at with calling him formless. So it's a little bit hard to understand whether or not like the blood gets its power from Erdon, or if like the Great One of Blood it blesses all the blood. It's pretty up in the air as far as that's concerned. One part of this description which does fascinate me is that the Great One Erdon lacking form exists only in voice. This idea of voice will become a bit more relevant when we look at Ariana and Adela's blood vials, because when you use Ariana's blood vial, you'll get like a kind of chiming sound with its sound effects when you use it, whereas the other blood vials lack those kind of things. I believe that's relevant later on because Ariana is described as having more impure or like vile blood, and it's precisely that impurity which makes it a higher quality catalyst for the Formless Great One, and that's what will allow their like eldritch intermingling, I believe the game says. So I think the Japanese for this is pretty straightforward, all things considered, even though it still doesn't make like a lot of things clear for us. I guess one small difference would be rather than saying like oozing blood is the medium of the highest grade, it's more like spilled blood. Spilled blood is a high quality catalyst, and it's the true nature of the formless superior being, or which is a great one. So Erden and its unwitting adherents secretly seek it, which is it's the blood. So there does seem to be a kind of lure in the blood which attracts both Erden and his followers, and that might relate into Adela's quest, which we'll do on this playthrough, where she becomes jealous of Ariana and kills her in a rage. I think it was Jerk Sans Frontiers who may have originally come up with the theory that what might have influenced Adela into going crazy could be like a pull from Erden to spill blood and to kill Ariana. So it's a very interesting thought, and I'm not sure if I fully buy it, but I definitely like it. And I don't really think we can have much to like argue against it. Like it's pretty easily supported, I think, from what we get in the game. And so in the very top of this chapel here, we've got another relief statue of the Hunter of St. Hubert, which I had mentioned before when we were in the Tomb of Erden. And so this is like the Holy Stag on like the Jägermeister logo and things like that. And it does come from something in real life, and St. Hubert was the patron saint of hunting in Catholicism. So I've already talked about that before, so I'll just kind of leave it there for now. And from this course, we get another messenger item, the Messenger Urn Festival. It says that it's an accessory adored by naive messengers. The messenger wear these urns filled with incense that wards off beasts on their heads upside down, suggesting a predilection to the dark. The inhabitants of the stump appear to have an interest in adornment. Why not let them be happy and revel as babes? I like this item just because it really helps characterize like the messengers as kind of being like silly and not really interacting in the with the world like the same way that like humans do, and they don't seem to understand like the significance of the items that they are like wearing, but. Other than that, there's really not like a ton to say about the messengers. We're not given a great deal of information about them as well. So ascending the Erden Chapel, we begin to enter the Healing Church Workshop, and an old man with a Gatling gun greets us on our way here, telling us to get off his lawn. And so one of the ways that we can figure out this is the Healing Church Workshop is we have like a bunch of weapons suspended from the ceiling. These weapons we can also kind of see in the Hunter's Dream itself. So aside from that, there's a bunch of coffins or caskets lining the walls as per usual in Yharnam. And then we gain another rune here, the first tier of the Communion. So I had mentioned this earlier, communion comes from Hyrio, and I was a bit confused, like I was associating the Hyrio for its name with like the holy body and the Thumerian like chalice. So it really just means something like bestowment. It's something that's given from a superior, someone of a superior status to someone lower. So it's almost, you could also say it's like blessing would be another way to translate it. It just kind of depends on the context and like what kind of nuance you really want to go for. So this is a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. Several runes relate to blood, including communion, which raises the maximum number of blood vials one may carry. This rune represents the healing church and its ministers. Blood ministration is, of course, the pursuit of communion. There is a little bit of a difference there. The final line in Japanese is closer to like blood healing, in other words, is none other than the research of communion. I think the overall message there is pretty similar. I bring this up just because in the Japanese version it kind of reinforces that like there's a kind of scholarly quality to the healing church's activities. And so research being related to blood and communion is something I do like to see be reinforced. I don't think there is anything else too different about that. Okay, yeah. And coming across this like a little bridge, we've got some snipers above us. And we will enter probably the real version of the Healing Church workshop, so it's a little bit questionable like if that first area was part of it. I would still say it was. And we get a lot of the common like Yarnamite style hunters here as well. So that does reinforce that hunters for the Healing Church provided equipment from this area because it is still pretty well loaded with the Yarnamites. And just like the areas before, we've still got all these weapons suspended from the ceilings, and just like caskets galore. And this one up here is probably more like supplies as opposed to a casket, but it does look like there's bones sticking out of it, so who really knows? We do, well, maybe not quite yet, but we will certainly find out. Like the Healing Church will like harvest bones and things like that for their rituals and stuff. So from there, we got thick cold blood from the corpse there. It's pretty high tier for where we've encountered things so far. DUI 13, welcome to the stream. You ask, why are there caskets in the Healing Church workshop? That's a good question. There will be a chest that I forgot to loot again at the bottom floor right there that has a blood gem in it. So thank you for asking that question. I probably would have forgotten about it because it's pretty negligible. So it could be that they might be like harvesting like bodies to search for blood gems or for the ritual materials. We don't get a whole lot of information. And for all intents and purposes, it could really just be like aesthetics on the part of FromSoft wanting to kind of like dial up the macabre horror of each individual area, I suppose. So we get a blood tinge gemstone, and I typically won't read like a lot of these descriptions because they kind of are almost all the same. So this is the one that we got. It's the same as all the other ones. I don't think I've read any of the generic ones yet. So this is a blood gem that fortifies weapons and adds various properties. Blood gems are especially rare bloodstones that grow on cold blood. Blood gems are kneaded into weapons using workshop tools, but only when of matching shape. Circular blood gems are normally used to fortify firearms. And then radial blood gems have effects that bear upon physical attacks, and I don't think there's like a ton of lore significance of the blood gems in general. I do find it very interesting that they grow on cold blood because cold blood is said to be incoagulable. So perhaps it could be related to like blood rocks, and like maybe they're produced with like a lot of pressurization to make something that wouldn't form a solid, forcibly become a solid. I'm not entirely sure. To gain a better understanding of the text. So this says the sky and the cosmos are one, and it's been penned by the choir. This note is very, very interesting. As far as the translation goes, I think this is a very good job. I like that they called the choir the choir. In Japanese, it's a little bit more literally like the holy song troupe, but considering like holy songs are like hymns, and like choirs and churches sing types of hymnals and things like that, I'm perfectly fine with calling them the choir, even though like it's a slightly divorced in English, especially if you're like more secular and not too familiar with like church activities and things like that. So one thing that I do want to bring up though is that it says like the sky and the cosmos are one. Uh, the kanji that they use for sky can also be attributed to like void or formlessness in Buddhism. Unfortunately, I haven't like this isn't like a voice dialogue to make it a bit clearer whether or not it should be understood as sky versus formlessness. But I do think it should be sky. I looked at the Korean version of this and they use Hanul, which is just like sky. So that's what I'm going to go with. So the skies and the cosmos is what the Japanese says. And so by saying like the sky and the cosmos are one, I think is a good touch on the part of the localizers to make it sound like mysterious and natural in English. And it helps immerse the player into like wanting to learn more about the cosmos being in the sky, because when we look out there, like depending on the time of night, it'll be darker or like evening, but we certainly don't see cosmos yet. But that might become a bit more relevant once we like encounter the One Reborn. And that little wheelchair huntsman has a flame sprayer, and this one does as well. They have like a kind of a plague doctor-esque mask on their face, which I like the aesthetics of. And they have like these like little boxes, all the wheelchair guys do, which are probably just like Quicksilver bullets. So here we get another workshop badge. The Radiant Sword Hunter badge, which is related to Ludwig and the Sword Hunter badge. If you compare the images between them, they're pretty much exactly the same, except the other one is much brighter and shinier and like white with light. So this says it's one of the badges crafted by the Healing Church. The Radiant Sword indicates the heirs to the will of Ludwig. These hunters, also known as Holy Blades, are what remains of an ancient line of heroes that date back to a very age of honor and chivalry. There are a lot of differences, I would say, within this description for the Japanese version of it. And I think the first one, I just want to double check this really quickly. Interesting. So I was initially thinking, just like looking at the English text of it, they're the heirs to the will of Ludwig. That version of will would relate to the dying wills, which are what like blood echoes are called, but that's not what it is in English, or sorry, in the Japanese. It's more like the shining blade indicates direct descendants of the hunter Ludwig. So what do I want to say about that? It's more like I think it's very likely that there was probably a different Japanese description for this item, and it got updated, but that updated text wasn't brought into English, just because there's such a difference between the English and Japanese for this. The final paragraph, to just kind of reinforce my point, instead of like saying these hunters are known as holy blades, blah 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 blah, it says like there were holy blade hunters known by two names. It's a unique relic of an age where beast hunters became heroes. That was very long ago now. So this talks like when it's saying that there's two types of holy blade hunters, that should be a kind of reference that there's the sword hunter badge and the radiant sword hunter badge. I believe that's what it's trying to get across there. But this thing about dating back to an age of honor and chivalry, that doesn't quite pan out in the Japanese description. That might have just been an attempt at a localization, like spiffing up the description to make it sound more bombastic, but I'm not entirely sure. And this does reinforce that like Ludwig was the first hunter of the Healing Church, and the hunters of the Healing Church are descended from like his kind of brand of hunting. So we can't access this area quite yet. It's locked. We don't have the key. We won't get it for very much later. And we've got a ton of like incense-filled urns and a bunch of skulls and bones around them, as well as like ashes. So it seems like they're really trying to keep beasts away from the upper strata of Cathedral Ward, where Alfred had mentioned like the higher-ranking members of the Healing Church reside. And so, since we can't proceed that way, we're going to go back down the workshop area. And try to kill this wandering madness before it eats itself off the cliff. So we get some twin bloodstone shards. I don't think I showed those off. Okay, that was the first time we got them. It does have the exact same description as the regular bloodstone shard. So the only real difference is essentially from the icon and its function. So it looks like there's like the two kind of shards instead of the one, which should be taken as a matter of course. So coming into the bottom area of the Healing Church workshop, we see a completely like dilapidated tower-esque structure. It seems to have been ravaged by fire, perhaps, because a lot of things just don't really work out together. We will have to like kind of come down this area twice, which is a bit annoying. If there's a couple ways to kind of go down into this kind of door that's a little bit separated from everything else. Maybe I can't really show it off very well quite yet. So there's you can like drop apparently between these two like planks to do it. My preferred method of doing it is just like kind of coming out onto this bridge, aiming my character's head at the ropes and just rolling towards it to land on that platform. You do take a substantial amount of fall damage, which is kind of annoying, and then from there you can just drop down to where the doors were, which I was talking about. And as we can see, it like really does not connect to anything else, so that's why we're gonna have to come back and like go down this area again to collect all the other items. So right now we have 10, 11, 12 insight from accessing a new area. That kind of ambient insight is a mechanic that's really hard to explain. It could just be like as you encounter new things, you are being told information from like inhuman voices, like those whispers that you can kind of hear as you enter a new area or encounter a boss. It could just be becoming into contact with the arcane, like we got more insight once we were frenzied by the invisible amygdala from earlier. And so coming into this area, we got that little indication that it's an abandoned workshop, and it definitely has a strong resemblance to the workshop of the Hunter's Dream. And to reinforce that, we've got the doll set in a chest. And of course, like the very first time the player accesses this area, you will get a trophy which says like the source of the dream, which should be pretty obvious what it's referring to. So coming into the workshop itself, like there aren't some of the weapons hanging up by the workshop bench where you could fortify your weapons and things like that. The memory altar, we don't have like the Carol runes yet, or the Carol rune workshop tool to use it yet, but like that isn't operable as a kind of set on itself, and instead we get a very, very important item for the lore of the game. We get the 1/3 of umbilical cord. The English for that is maybe a little bit scuffed. Instead of saying 1/3 of a cord, it's more like likely it's a third umbilical cord. So there's going to be essentially perhaps a first or second cord before this one, and this is the third one. It doesn't necessarily mean like if you have 3 parts of these cords that you'll get a full umbilical cord. So what a potential first or second umbilical cord are, we have no idea. It could just be something that we'll never really find out, unfortunately. So the quick description says it's a great relic also known as the Cord of the Eye, which I think is pretty significant, and I'll talk about that more later. So 1/3 of umbilical cord. A great relic, also known as the Cord of the Eye. Every infant Great One has this precursor to the umbilical cord. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Used to gain insight, and so they say, eyes on the inside, although no one remembers what that truly entails. I think I'm going to go ahead and just read like my entire Japanese retranslation of this item, just to get that out of the way and just talk about it from there. So, third umbilical cord, a great relic also known by another name, eye cord. Only infants have them, even in great ones. Calling it an umbilical cord comes from that. Every superior being loses its infant and desires another. Therefore, this brought a chance encounter with the paled moon, and it became the beginning of the hunters and the hunter's dream. Gain insight from its use, but at the same time, it is also said gain eyes on the inside, but everyone has forgotten what that will truly bring. So, of course, my retranslation is a little bit choppy because it's literal at times, so it doesn't always like flow as well as like you would want for something to keep a player immersed in a kind of like fantastic world. So, the real big difference is like this cord of the eye is not a precursor to an umbilical cord. It's that the reason it's called an umbilical cord is because only infant Great Ones possess them, is what I get from the Japanese of this text. The part about Great Ones yearning for surrogates is a little bit more implied. Well, I don't know how to phrase this exactly. So the Japanese doesn't explicitly say like Great Ones yearn for surrogate children. It's more or less implied that like they lose infants and therefore they're searching for infants, and so it's just kind of like one of the ways that Japanese works, where they just kind of don't like use full sentences. They kind of use fragments to get across part of their meaning. I don't mind that they say that they yearn for surrogate children. I think it kind of works out. It's just a little bit I don't know what to call it. So forgive me. I'm just gonna go ahead and move on. So the other part is it brought an encounter with the pale moon. This is probably one of the links that's supposed to tip the player off that like the idea of pale blood is connected to the moon presence, and so pale blood and paled moon I think are supposed to be related. And so it's a little bit more obvious in Japanese because the term like for pale is more like paled, or has gone pale, or has been paled by something else. And so in English, just saying like pale moon just kind of sounds like a natural way to describe the moon. But whatever caused like this this umbilical cord to form also seemed to be responsible for the creation of the hunter's dream, which is very interesting to consider, especially since it's most likely related to the moon presence. So it's a little bit unclear how that interaction came to be, whether or not like Lawrence had the cord or Gehrman did. Yeah, I think it might be possible to read it like Gehrman must have had the cord and Lawrence had the blood. But it's really just one of the least or most ambiguous parts of the game, and more left up to like players to decide for themselves. And then we get the abandoned doll, And if we examine her up close and look at her finger, I'm trying to get a decent angle of it. You will see her index finger will occasionally like wriggle, almost like the way that the top will continue to spin at the very end of a Inception. A spoiler alert, I suppose. And this many players will take to interpret it as like an indication that the world we're in right now could be part of a nightmare still, or something along those lines. And we get another messenger lamp and a small hair ornament. So this is a small, very ordinary hair ornament. Although it has been lost for quite some time, one can still see signs of the care with which the tasteful ornament was once kept. Its color would stand out most brilliantly against a head of grayish hair. So we can give this to the doll later to kind of make her feel happy and emotion, which is extremely rare for her. We will find that out. In earlier versions of the game, like the doll was based on Queen Annalise of Canehurst, who has gray hair. So I think that idea of like gray hair originally was supposed to link like the hair ornament with Annalise, and it just kind of didn't work out. And so the interpretation that we have available to us now is like this is a hairpin for Maria, especially once we do encounter Maria and see that she pretty much looks exactly like the doll. And speaking of Maria and items related to her, we get the old hunter bone, with which there's a kind of like infamous mistranslation, arguably, in the game. So this says it's the bone of an old hunter whose name is lost. It is said that he was an apprentice of old Gehrman and a practitioner of the art of quickening, a technique particular to the first hunters. It is most appropriate that hunters, carriers of the torch who are sustained by the dream, release an old art from his remains. If anybody is like watching Vati he has gotten some information from another translator, Loki, who pointed out correctly that for the Japanese item description there is no like gendered pronouns to say whether or not this old hunter was a male or a female. And since that kind of avenue gets opened up for us, we can infer that this bone may have belonged to Maria because she does use quickening in her fight. She was an apprentice of Gehrman. She seemed to be the most close to him for like the raid on the fishing helmet and all of that. So I think it's a pretty good reading of what we have in the final version of the game. A German spy did mention that Flora was an associate of Lawrence and Gehrman's in like some of the very very early drafts of the game, and Flora is a name for the moon presence. Occasionally, you can find a doll who will pray to Flora of the Moon of the Dream, and so obviously that definitely did not make it to the final version of the game. Although I find it very very fascinating that it was a thing at all. Lance McDonald has also come across this information as well. I think he's going to release a video at some point, but I'm not entirely sure what the timeline of that will be. So there are multiple sources that do say like this bone belonged to like the associate of Lawrence and Gehrman, and it's most likely Flora fulfilled that role. It's not explicit, but it's certainly implied in very early cut content for the game. Let me just double check. Oh, right, quickening. Quickening is a very interesting mechanic. Like it'll kind of allow the player to fade out of existence instead of like rolling for a dodge, and then they just kind of like reappear out of like thin air. This technique, since it's particular to the first hunters, it does make me wonder whether or not like it's something more related to Thumerians and those of like the Canehurst descent, because when we encounter like the Thumerian elders and Queen Yarnum, they will be able to like blink out of existence and reappear in different areas, like a much much stronger version of quickening. Maria doesn't need to use the old hunter bone to use like a similar kind of technique. And once Gamerman gets filled with like the kind of lunar energy in his fight, he's able to use a form of quickening as well. So um, it's a little bit curious as to like how this technique comes to work on a mechanical level, but like or rather like what point would someone need to be like infused with blood to be able to use quickening without like using a hunter bone is what I'm trying to get across. And so the very last part is carriers of the torch who are sustained by the dream is a little bit different in Japanese. It says extracting an old skull from the dying wills of these remains may be an appropriate thing for hunters who inherit dying wills due to the dream. And so uh, I don't think like it's a bad translation of the English like from a purely like technical standpoint. However, it really misses a lot of contextual information within the game itself, in that these dying wills are related to blood echoes, and so this idea of inheriting dying wills is something that's pretty relevant to hunters in general. Like we won't kill him this playthrough, but like Hendrik will drop the air rune, which talks about like hunters being the inheritors of dying wills or blood echoes and things like that. And once we kill Ram, the doll will mention like the hunters inherited the ancient wills, and they like or the ancient echoes, and they course through our veins. So this idea of inheritance is pretty particular to hunters, it seems, and it's a little bit unfortunate that that kind of information just gets lost in translation at times. All right, so that's it for like this abandoned old workshop. If you guys have any questions about it, anything I've gone over, or if you just have lore questions in general, feel free to let me know. So obviously, the abandoned dream is the inspiration for the hunter's dream.
Welcome. What?
I don't think I have enough to level.
Very well. Let me.
Oh, and okay, that does remind me. I wanted to show it off the last stream, but I completely, or the last lore through, but I completely forgot. When you do give the hair ornament to the doll, she will make a gesture as though she's wiping away a tear. So I wanted to kind of capture that close up.
Welcome home, good hunter. What is it you desire? What? What is this? I can't remember. Not a thing, only I feel a yearning, something I never felt before. What's happening to me? Tell me, hunter, could this be joy?
And so from the doll we gain the tear stone. Oh shit. And so I do really like that they went through the trouble of adding that animation because it's not something that they necessarily needed to do, but it really does give like that kind of a little bit of extra context for obtaining the tear stone. Hey Devin guy, it's nice to see you again, man. So hopefully you just saw me show off the doll wiping away the tear for the tear stone. So this is the silver shining tear stone. Use it to change into a droplet blood gem that fortifies any weapon. A doll sheds neither blood nor tears, and thus its nature remains unknown. Whoever thinks this is precious must be troubled by severe naivete. Story-wise, is Arcane used Silver Bullet as DUI? Arcane is a bit of an enigma. I would say personally that it's more like a cosmic force in Bloodborne. Like on Earth, we kind of have things like electricity. I would almost equate like Arcane as being something kind of like that. There does seem to be like a more physical element to it that can be like accessed with like a lot of research and things like that, but it's not quite that simple because it's also related to insight and stuff like that, and it doesn't really have like that full-on like tangible element that something like magnetism or electricity does. So there is a certain overlap between Quicksilver and the Arcane for sure, because you do use like Quicksilver bullets to interact with like the Phantasm shells, Augur Vibratus, etc. And so it seems like that Mercury has the potential to kind of be the closest substance to like the nightmares and things like that, which might allow it to be pulled into the world, or vice versa. So Devin says the Tear Stone looks hella similar to the Divine Dragon's Tears from Sekiro. Yeah, a lot of things in like the FromSoft games are like motifs that get reused over and over. It almost seems like in a kind of macro sense that they're remaking like the same game or like the same themes over and over, and just kind of like refining them and tweaking them until they get them like where they want to. It doesn't quite always work out, but I do appreciate like the different kinds of iterations that they make throughout the games. So I did want to look at the Japanese for this because I did remember at some point I think there is like a bit of a difference in that like some people might think the doll, and this is I would almost argue like more of like a joke take, is like could be an evil being because of that final line where whoever thinks this is precious must be troubled by severe naivete. They might read that to be a little bit more sinister than I think it's supposed to get across. The Japanese for that final line is like that is what the creator wished of the doll. However, it might not have resided within such a thing. Maybe I should have given the additional context before that, in that it says like it was produced from the shining silver-colored tears of a doll and resembles gentle consolation. It has the effect of continually restoring life force HP. And so the creator probably wanted the doll to be able to console them, and that idea of consolation or like comfort might not exist within the doll is what it's trying to get across. So like you shouldn't necessarily rely on a doll for the warmth of a human, I think is what it tries to get across. And I believe that that idea of warmth and human warmth does directly tie into like the doll set, which I'll go ahead and read now. So it says this is a discarded doll's hat, likely a spare for dress up. A deep love for the doll can be surmised by the fine craftsmanship of this article and the care with which it was kept. It borderlines on mania, and exudes a slight warmth. Let me just pull up the Japanese before I look at chat again. Devin says, does Japanese use a different word than naivete? I'll also double check that. Japanese sounds very similar to another description, probably the doll set. Yeah. So maybe the English guy didn't want to use the same kind of wording. Let's look at the tear stone again. So no, it doesn't use like naivete at all. It just kind of like lacks that. So they might have been using a different draft where that could have been more of a thing. I'm a little bit skeptical of that. So yeah. As for the doll set, the last portion that I want to like highlight, it says it resembles obsession, therefore it is a little warm. I mentioned this earlier on one of the other streams where this idea of obsession and madness are kind of related, and that once you become so obsessed with something, you kind of like appear to be possessed. You ignore the world around you to kind of like pursue your goals. And in Bloodborne and like Buddhism in general, like sometimes like it's really hard to distinguish someone who's like a sage, a monk, or a saint, like a really holy person who's really knows a lot about like the spiritual side of the world from the common fool. And part of that is because some of their actions can seem really similar, especially like with ascetics. Like it's really hard to distinguish like an ascetic monk who like denies like their physical well-being and like doesn't eat very much or drinks very very little, to like that of a bum who just kind of like wanders around and might get drunk all day. They both kind of seem to spout nonsense at times, and that's kind of a really like Eastern like thought process, and it does get a bit related to Insight as well. And unfortunately, I don't have like the Madman set to just kind of highlight that, but that idea of mania is related to frenzy, which is like what's talked about in the Cold Blood. And so once you go from like normal Cold Blood to with thick or rich Cold Blood, you get frenzied Cold Blood, and then beyond that you become closer to approaching like the levels of being a Great One by getting Kin Cold Blood, and then of course Great One Cold Blood. So that idea of mania is really important here, and I think like that idea that the reason why the doll's clothes are warm is because it was made with such obsession that it almost seems as though like it was already worn by a human. So that's a pretty deep reading into that. You're very welcome to disagree with that. That's just kind of what makes sense to me from looking at everything with that. And so okay, that's pretty much everything with the doll set and the Tear Stone, I think. So we're going to go ahead and go back to the Cathedral Ward and go down that like little tower area that we were at before. Devin says, to you it also kind of makes it sound like the doll is alive in a way. Exactly. Like the kind of attention to detail was so obsessive, like it essentially resembles a living human being. And so, of course, like that is pretty emblematic of like people like interpreting like Garamond as kind of like being a creepy, obsessive individual. I don't think I can like necessarily deny that, but I think it's just a little bit shallow of a reading of Garamond. It could also just be because like he was so lonely that it just kind of turned out that way. But of course, like it doesn't really excuse the fact that you find like the abandoned doll in the real world equivalent of the workshop, especially if like Maria was a real person. One interpretation that I could have to like kind of reconcile that would potentially be that he could have done it after Maria killed herself, but that's just more like conjecture more than anything else on my part. So Devin says it's so meticulous it couldn't possibly be for a doll. Yeah, exactly. And so now that that way has been cleared out, we can go down like these little rafters or whatever you want to call them to try to obtain some of these items. You get the messenger top hat, which I really like. It's just kind of funny to me that you can give top hats to messengers. It's a hat that messengers are oddly fond of. A nice top hat rounds out any Yarnum gentleman. The inhabitants of the stump appear blah 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 blah. We've read that plenty of times already. Restless. Sorry about that. And then we get some more Madman's knowledge. I'm pretty sure there's nothing like too significant about the Japanese of the messenger hat. So I'm not going to worry about that. I think it was at 7 before. This is like the only area that's hard for me to see at a time. Like the last time I did this lore through, I fell to my death because I couldn't see where that platform was. So now that we've come to the bottom of this, oh, I've already aggroed him. Damn it! I was gonna try to use my monocular. We encounter the beast-possessed soul. This is like the only area that's hard for me to see at a time. Like the last time I did this lore through, I fell to my death because I couldn't see where that platform was. So now that we've come to the bottom of this, oh, I've already aggroed him. Damn it! I was gonna try to use my monocular. We encounter the beast-possessed soul. a kind of a demonic looking beast man who stands up on both legs, has horns, and can use like pyromancy, which is extremely, extremely rare for a game like Bloodborne, and it seems really out of place. It does a lot of damage. This is the only version of this that we will find in the base game. And so I do like to kind of like show off some of its attacks. Like it's extremely different from like the Scourge Beasts in that regard. You can occasionally find these in the Chalice Dungeon as well as like bosses. And after we kill this one, we get the Beast Rune. So, Devin says he's a horny boy. Indeed. Used to associate this guy with Loran because of the Chalice boss, but the dudes in Yharnam grow little horns as well, and not just the Loran clerics. Right, so it is really interesting that this is like the only one that we find in the base game, for sure. And so this says it's a secret symbol left by Carol Runesmith of Bergenworth. It's a transcription of the roar of a labyrinth beast. The bearer of the beast rune has accentuated temporary transformation effects. Beast is one of the early Carol runes, as well as one of the first to be deemed forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. So, in the Japanese version of this game, it does say that the Beast Rune is the first Carol rune that was discovered. I went ahead and double-checked completely matches up with the English in that it says it was like among the early Carol, the first. So it seems for sure that this description did receive an update and it just kind of didn't make it back into the hands of the translators. As far as like the lore of that is concerned, it's really interesting that the Beast was the first Carol rune discovered. Because if like Lawrence was the first like cleric beast of the Healing Church and he uses the Beast Embrace rune, it just doesn't quite like add up. Unless of course there were other beasts before Lawrence and he was like the first cleric beast. With that being said, there is I think another slight difference in the Japanese there. I don't think it was like super different overall. It says Beast was the first Carol rune and at the same time was the first forbidden. The discovery of blood was, in other words, the discovery of undesired beasts. So yeah, it's just a little bit more direct in Japanese, that like final part where the discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesired beasts or undesirable beasts. It's more like, I mean, it's pretty identical, all things considered. The other part would be this rune is interesting because it said it's a transcription of a roar of a labyrinth beast as opposed to like something like a great one or like inhuman voices, which are what's like mentioned in some of the other runes. So the fact that like beasts themselves are able to kind of incur this kind of like cosmic arcane power of a Carol rune, I think is very interesting, and I do think at times there is like a kind of a false dichotomy presented within like the fans of the game, and that they think like there's a real like detachment between like insight and beasthood, or like great ones and beasts. I think since like these beast possessed souls could use like pyromancy and they're able to like create Carol runes of themselves, it does kind of like call into question just exactly like how much of a dichotomy that really is. So a DUI asks, a beast that uses fire? Yeah, it's very rare indeed. And Devin says, it's also because it's the only one of those guys you find outside the chalices. Is beast possessed soul named something different in Japanese? Not so much. It's more like beast possession, if I'm remembering correctly. Which beast possessed soul, like I don't like mind as a translation at all. Like You could have called it like Beast Possessed 1 instead, but it's pretty negligible in my opinion. Although like that does like kind of lead into interesting questions about beasts. Can they actually possess people? Are they like spirits capable of that? I think if you really wanted to go like with just like the purest route, that could be an argument as just say like maybe they should have just left it as like beast possession instead. So coming out of the tower area, in which like there's really nothing left. We just got like a bunch of ashes, which might be another reason to believe it got burnt down at some point. Was the Cathedral Ward area. We will be able to talk to some more NPCs. These little lanterns highlight that for us.
A night of curses. A night to remember. Wouldn't you say, friend? A night of curses. Wouldn't you say, friend?
So that's one of the few NPCs that just like don't treat us terribly for being a foreigner off the rip. When we come down here, we will find like a bunch of the graves, the older style graves, like just littering the alleys. They're very close together, which shows like this is more of like a either residential district or like lower class. We do find like a lot of like the signs for shops. It's a little bit hard to make out, especially like on my kind of small monitor, but some of them are like probably more indicative of like carpentry, things like that. I think this one over here is like a saw on it. Oh yeah, I've got my. So yeah, I think that's like a saw, like one of the ones that the tall beast boys will carry around. And then we get the sweaty set from this corpse here. It really doesn't have like a lot to go for it in English or Japanese. It's common Yarnum cap, well worn and losing its shape, well worn and damp with sweat. So very, very straightforward as you might imagine. It's the Snatcher, and then that dog messed me up last time because I forgot about it. So this enemy over here, why am I doing this? Is a kidnapper, a kind of like almost Thumerian fellow who only appears once we kill the blood-starved beast. If he kills us, we will be kidnapped and transported to a new location. I'll try to show that off once we like complete this little section of Cathedral Ward. So not quite yet. They hit extremely hard for this portion of the game. Oh no, that's not good. That is not what I wanted. Is it gonna get stuck on the door? Alright, interesting pro strats to remember. As I've said before, I can beat any enemy in these Dark Souls games as long as they're one of them. If there's two or more, I'll try to run and win cheaply. So I suppose I should have shown those like Yarnamites off. They are another kind of patrolling group. They're still essentially like the same kinds of Yarnamites and all that, but they just have like a bit of different clothes on, and try to show off the sack man too if I can get the rag dolls to work in my favor. Alright, whatever. So he carries a sack, potentially, of like either people or like their ripped off body parts. It's not fully clear. It's got very like bluish tinged skin, and he's very tall and a lot taller than like a lot of the other kind of like normal humanoid enemies that we'll encounter. There we go. So it also has like these kind of like tattoos on its chest. Its face is, I mean, he doesn't look very lively, all things considered. And not just because he's dead right now. And so like the Yarnamites over here, I mean, they're still common Yarnamites. They just have like a bit different clothes on. And then they've got like these kind of like butcher-esque masks on, and you can really see like the fur coming out of their faces as well. But that's just not limited to them. Devin's laughing at the cursed ragdoll physics for lore through. Yeah, it's like modified butcher garb. Some more Madman's knowledges. Oh, and before I forget, like, as far as like cursed like city planning is concerned, I'm confident there's like another residence right over here that has just like literally like gravestones like right outside the door. Yep, okay. Try to stumble home to that after a long night out at the bars, am I right? Well, it'd be pretty easy to hide a package there, at least. But just a lot of the layout of Yharnam really doesn't make sense, which is part of why some people don't believe it's really like the waking world after all. So yeah, it's got like these kind of like leather type aprons on its body as well. Some more graves right outside the door. And so like very, very small, cramped alleyways, and this just kind of leads us back to where we were. And so like there's barrels all over the place. There's a kind of fewer coffins, but there's still some occasionally around. So they're like crated around on these like wagons and wheelbarrows and things like that. So a lot of things in Yharnam don't make a ton of sense, and you just kind of either have to mark down as being aesthetics or go crazy trying to figure it out for yourself. So coming into this next little area, we've got one of the coolest enemies of the game, one of the most terrifying enemies of the game, a brain sucker. I'm probably not going to try to show off too much of its attacks, but it uses like cosmically arcane attacks to paralyze the player, and a gigantic like slug-like parasite will come out of its head to drain our insight after it grabs us with one of those terrifying animations. When you stab it or attack it, it bleeds a very like pale gray kind of silvery blood. And perfectly posed like one of our French girls. If we look closely at its face, it doesn't seem to have eyes. It's got really long hands for like its body, a very, very slender fingers, and like these kind of like tendrils coming out of its face. So pretty terrifying, all things considered. It's got like these kind of white grayish robes that have been like completely matted with dirt. And I think in the final version of the game, once like the DLC's been included, it might be possible to interpret like the brain suckers as having been related to the experiments or the research hall patients. So we get a fire gemstone, but there's not like a whole ton of lore of like the gemstones. I've already read a couple, and there's really not many differences between them. So it's very likely that like the Healing Church was conducting experiments onto people to try to raise them to the state of a great one, and they might have done that by implanting phantasms into their brains or into their heads. And that might be why the brain suckers became a thing. So I didn't show it off before, but this was like a kind of closed off pathway into Cathedral Ward, obviously. By opening this gate, it will gain us access to the Cathedral Ward proper without the use of the Hunter Chief emblem. And there's some more patrolling guys, and they can find you occasionally. Coming up here, we have this really oddly lit area, probably just to attract the players to trying to come up here. And on this corpse here, we get some numbing mists, which are pretty good for the boss of this area. So, oh shit! I didn't even know they could climb the ladders like that. How rude! I was gonna look at the description. Just to bring it up, since it's pretty obvious right now, its lantern is just like a kind of normal looking lantern. Once we go through Yahar'gul, they'll be covered with eyes once we have 15 insight. Oh, and it's kind enough to drop a blue elixir. So that's pretty neat. I guess the other one's not going to come. Alright, so what did we get? We got the numbing mist and then the blue elixir. So, numbing mist. Throw to create a mist cloud that numbs a hunter's life essence and prevents restoration of HP. Said to be used by the blood hunters of Cainhurst, its recipe is a secret closely guarded by the line of nobles inhabiting the castle. There's a ton of relevance as to why it's just chilling on a random roof in the middle of the Cathedral Ward on a corpse there. I suppose you might wonder whether or not that corpse belonged to a member of Cainhurst. For what it's worth, the imposter Yosefka will give the player numbing mist if you send some of the NPCs to her. Did I talk to? Yeah, I did talk to her. So I'm just probably not going to send any NPCs to her this playthrough. And so we get the blue elixir from one of the church servants. The giant ones will also drop them on occasion. So this is dubious liquid medicine used in strange experiments conducted by high ministers of the healing church, a type of anesthetic that numbs the brain. Hunters, able to retain consciousness by force of will, make use of a secondary effect of the medicine, which dilutes the presence while standing still. The biggest difference in the Japanese version of this is hunters are able to retain their consciousness by force of the dying wills, which is essentially because of their blood echoes, they're able to resist the effects of the blue elixirs. So that's a pretty important distinction I would make. I don't think there was anything different about the numbing mist that's noteworthy. Yeah, okay, pretty much exactly the same. Right, so that's that for now. The one other thing that I would like to mention with the numbing mist is the building that it comes from, or right next to the building that has it, is got these kind of lion looking sigils, which are most likely related to Cainhurst, although I guess these kind of look more like griffins, super close, but it's very related to the Castle Cainhurst, and you can find the inscription on Ariana's door as well. Oh, I thought I was too slow with that. I'm gonna get hit. Devin says fat rare loot. Yeah, I got lucky both playthroughs because I got one from one of the giant church servants on my last one. So we got the other messenger item. Which was it? the black. Yeah, it was this one. So this is a hat that messengers are oddly fond of, symbol of preventative hunters of the Healing Church. And what it means by like preventative hunters will be revealed a bit more once we get like the Black Church side, I think it is, which is I think in this area as well, on the other part of Cathedral Ward. On that, the Healing Church will just kind of hunt people they suspect of being beasts, and they might be normal. And that becomes a bit more relevant when we consider, like, within that supplementary material, they say, like, the Scourge of the Beasts causes people to project their own inner beasthood onto others, and that becomes a bit relevant when we consider, like, the beasts don't attack each other, they pretty much only attack humans. Once we open enough of the gates, like Eileen will be standing over here to ask us, well, to warn us of going to the Term of Erden to fight Henrik. I think the gate that I opened just a bit ago will trigger Eileen, but since I haven't reloaded the area, she won't appear. So I'm going to go ahead and like level up and spend my echoes before getting snatched and heading to Yahar'gul.
Welcome home, good hunter. What is... Very well. Let me...
I don't do a ton of damage right now, but whatever. I'll just deal with it. And complain about it, most likely.
Over time, the great...
I don't think Garen's gonna say anything different. Although he might not even be here again. Oh, so he might be in the back? Hopefully he is. No dice. So we can give the hunters, or sorry, the messengers, their little adornments so they can revel as babes. And that's what they look like when given some of the items. Lacking the twins. Where is Gehrman? DUI asks. Unfortunately, he just kind of dips out at times, and you can't really find him anywhere. If he isn't in the workshop, occasionally he'll be like back here, literally like sleeping, and he'll call out for Lawrence to release him from the dream. Unfortunately, we didn't get that this time, so maybe like the next time or two we come through the Hunter's Dream, we'll be able to trigger that. I'm not 100% sure what exactly triggers it, but we'll just have to deal with it as we go along. In the field? Are you talking about like where you would fight him? I don't think you can see him over there ever. He's not over by like the Great Tree, I don't think. So yeah, sometimes he just kind of disappears. The last time he disappeared, like he left a note saying he'd like to send Erden Chapel, but it is a good question, especially like if you're really wondering about it from like a storytelling perspective, like where the hell does this guy go? Like there's really nowhere else to go in the Hunter's Dream, so is he just being absorbed into the moon, or is he just like a manifestation of the moon and the moon presence? So it's a bit hard to say. So I think Eileen might have appeared now. No, so I need to open the other gate. Um, let's just go ahead and do that before we get snatched. And then, of course, utilizing the most OP strat in a Soulsborne game, just running and ignoring everything. And so, oh wow, is that her already? Did I miss her before? I feel like that's something I would do. Probably gonna like want to recheck the VOD to see if I'm just losing my mind.
Oh, hello there. Perfect timing. I must warn you not to go near the tomb below Erden Chapel in the Cathedral Ward. Henrik, an old hunter, has gone mad. And he's my mark. Don't go near the tomb below Erden Chapel in the Cathedral Ward. I have business there first.
So that final bit of Eileen's dialogue, she has that like chuckling. That chuckling is something that I would say would be like characteristic of someone who's either like already going mad or is on the cusp of going mad, and that will become a bit relevant later, especially for this playthrough where we will not help her take on Henrik, so that way we will end up fighting her in the Grand Cathedral, where she will be blood drunk herself. I'm not sure if there's a much of a difference in the Japanese for her dialogue. I suppose she, instead of like saying he's my mark, she says like he's my prey. So like this idea of like hunters like are kind of related to beasts themselves because they'll consider like their marks like their prey, like a beast. Yeah, that's pretty much the only real difference.
Don't go near the tomb below. I have
Alright, so that's Eileen the Crow advancing part of her quest line. So we're gonna go ahead and get snatched. Like that dude just did so much damage to me. I forgot to get the item behind him. It's really small. I think it might be like a Madman's Knowledge or something like that. And so after taking damage and essentially getting killed by one of the Snatchers... Oh, I thought there would be like a damage flag which would trigger it. Interesting. Looks like I have to get killed by it. I almost forgot to pick it up again. So these guys do have like kind of like arcane style attacks. That one doesn't do damage, but like it's very rare for like enemies to like kind of use spells, especially like humanoid ones. So being taken to Yahar'gul, the unseen village, gives us another point of insight. We can see that a snatcher is the one who threw us in this kind of cell that we are now placed in. You would almost think that being thrown in a cell would kind of be a way to secure that we wouldn't get free, but the door to it is just completely left open. Like there's no real mechanics like in Dark Souls 1, like when you're thrown into the cell in the Duke's Archives, there'll be like a guard kind of chilling next to the door that you can stab and like loot the key from. Bloodborne doesn't even offer us that kind of courtesy. So I think maybe the idea would be, since we were killed, like most Yarnamites might not continue to move around after the fact, so the Snatcher might not have really cared to lock the door behind itself. Or it could just be like mindless and not really think about it. So we get a higher tier of the thick cold blood from that corpse there. And then we get a important lore note that is held up by some more messengers. It says, madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, uncover their secrets. So Yahar'gul is probably like one of the worst offenders in terms of either mistranslations or the text not matching the Japanese, or the final version of the Japanese. DUI asks, is this also treated as a prison? Where do criminals even go? That's a good question. From the lamp that we will access here later, we can discover that it's called and jail is spelled like with an archaic English spelling, like Gaol. So some people might think it's pronounced Gaol, but it really just means like an underground prison or an underground jail. And so going back to the note here, it isn't like a fully translated in English. The Japanese for it is let me find it real quick. The ritual of madmen beckons the moon, and it is being hidden. The ritual's concealment must be destroyed. And so, like this part about the ritual's concealment is more implied in the Japanese, but it definitely uses the term like for concealment as opposed to like hiding, and that's supposed to be thematically relevant to Yahar'gul as a whole, because it's called Yahar'gul, the unseen village. In Japanese, like the term that they use for like concealment here is also what they use to describe or like saying like the rituals are being hidden. Like Yahar'gul is called like the hidden village in Japanese, I think is what I should say instead. And so the part that's missing from the Japanese is that the rituals are being hidden, and so that's a really big a thing to leave out as far as like trying to understand what the hell is going on and what the player needs to do to advance the story.
In the name of the healing church, cleanse us of this horrible dream.
So the woman whose voice we just heard is cowering visibly behind some urns, literally quivering in fear, and her name is Adela, and she will not respond to us until like she sees that we're affiliated with the Healing Church.
Oh, please leave me be. Don't take me, please. Oh, please, dear gods.
Zooming out, I'm going to go ahead and equip Gascoigne's garb, and the shawl on it is what indicates that we're kind of a part of the Healing Church.
Ah, by your garb, the Healing Church. You've come to save me. Oh, thank you, dear saint. I have no words to express my relief. You can take this, at least.
And then she hands us a Madman's Knowledge, which is interesting.
It's sure to please an upstanding member of the church like you. Oh, thank you so much, dear gods.
It does always like kind of crack me up, like the idea that Adela might have been like cowering in a corner behind some urns while like literally holding onto the skull of a human. Uh, just because I don't know, just that kind of like a juxtaposition is too ironic to ignore. Um, but it does also show like an interesting aspect to the healing church, that they could recognize that like madman's knowledge is something like the members of the healing church will covet and use for themselves. And so Adela thinks that like handing us that madman's knowledge will please us, and that might be a bit relevant later on, like when we go through the rest of the cathedral ward and find like a ton of the corpses there are laden with the madman's knowledges. So whether or not they're like kind of like heirlooms or something that's passed down from generation to generation is a bit unclear. Uh, I think maybe the idea behind Madman's knowledges and insight in general could be that they might be somewhat similar to the kind of visions that we get when we place our hands on the skull of Lawrence in the Grand Cathedral. Looking at Adela's Japanese dialogue, I don't think there's much of a difference. And so this next portion of the dialogue will kind of reveal like what happened to her.
Thank you so much. I was seized on the street by the hulking brute in the cathedral ward and locked up here. There were many others, but they've been taken away. And I've heard moans echoing in the distance ever since.
There's a small difference. Rather than just saying like their moans echoing in the distance, the Japanese is a bit clearer in that it's more like along the lines of screaming in the distance, coming from far away. And hulking brute is a good translation choice, I think. In Japanese, it's just more like, oh, it was a giant man which accosted her. So I don't necessarily think that means it was a church giant, so I think hulking brute is probably a better choice than the more literal rendition of that text.
So, the hunt is on tonight. Then the streets are perilous, and every door will be shut tight. Perhaps it isn't my place to ask, but do you know somewhere that might take me in?
So we could tell her of Erden's Chapel, Yosefka's clinic, or withhold the information. If we don't tell her anything, we can eventually find her corpse within the cathedral ward, having been murdered. If we send her to the clinic, she'll become a celestial emissary later on, and it will prematurely end her quest. And this time we're going to send her to Erden Chapel and have her kill Ariana later on. I thought there was something else I wanted to mention with her lines right there. Oh, right. So the hunt is on tonight. That's posed to us as a question. I find this bit of dialogue very interesting to consider, because it would almost imply that we shouldn't take it for granted that like the night of the hunt is something which occurs every night, because if that were the case, it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense for her to seem like surprised by it, I would say, like with this dialogue. And this does come at odds with one of the information that's like one piece of information on like one of the Bloodborne pages on the Sony website, which it says something along the lines of like the night of the hunt, like night after night, like the hunters go out like hunting beasts. So I would take this as like more canon than like some of the supplementary material. So just to like kind of bring some awareness that there is that kind of disparity in terms of like the first-hand information that we can get from the game, and even just like official sourced information. So hello Sundry Saturn, it's nice that you are joining us again. As you can see, we are in Yahar'gul now, having just done the first portion of Cathedral Ward, and now we're going to send Adela to the chapel.
Much. I'll set out as soon as I can. I pray for success on your hunt, kind hunter.
And for kind hunter there, I think she says like Karyudo-sama, which is or like Hunter-sama. Yeah, okay. So I do like that they added like Kind Hunter there to kind of make her English dialogue sound more naturally reverential, because that's really hard to like pull off with some of the Japanese like suffixes that they'll use to like denote their like societal relationships between each other. So like Sama can like come across as like being lord or master. So in English that just comes across as like really like stilted or formal, and it doesn't quite match up with like how we tend to speak naturally. So just Kind Hunter is a really good choice in my opinion.
I'll set out as soon as I can. I pray for success on your hunt, Kind Hunter.
Alright, so with that done, she will go into the chapel. And just examining some of the key pieces of like furniture here. We've got all the incense urns, and we've got what look to be almost broken, unreflective mirrors littering the place all over. And we got like these kind of like lamp-looking like things that are a bit hard to make out. It almost seems like there would be like kerosene lamps, and like none of them are active. It's a little bit hard to say for sure. And then these are probably like more mirrors that have been covered with black cloth. So fortunately, we did just get a brand new tier of the cold blood, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. So as I've mentioned before, but I don't think that I've like really shown it off. Like there's that progression of 1, 2, 3, and then we're missing 4, 5, 6, 7. And if we look at their icons, there isn't a ton of difference between like one tier. Like there's a lot more of like the silver particle effects, which are probably representative of the blood echoes. But when you go to the next tier, it seems to be bigger and like more bubbling. And then frenzied cold blood is even larger. So this is a rich droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes, used to gain frenzied blood echoes. This manifestation of madness comes from a mind teetering on the very brink, but has a sane mind ever produced anything of true significance? So I've mentioned it a lot in a lot of detail earlier, like the idea of like a frenzy being related to madness. This just kind of gets reinforced right here, where it says this manifestation of madness. And when I was talking about like the idea of like sages like being indistinguishable from fools, is kind of on display here as well, where it talks about has a sane mind ever produced anything of true significance. And it comes from a mind teetering on the very brink. I suppose that doesn't get across in the English. The Japanese for that is like the final paragraph is closer to like it's definitely madness and not something of a normal person, or perhaps being normal is quite nonsensical. And like that's a very like literal rendition of this dialogue, so it just does not flow, I think, supernaturally. But the idea is like normal person is somebody who hasn't gone mad. They're just like a regular person in society. And so the idea of like being sane is questionable, and that's kind of what's supposed to be implied by that description there. So like the true way to gain enlightenment in Bloodborne is to do something which is akin to like actual madness, and staying normal will not be of any use to like the player or like the characters in the world, is what I think it's trying to get across to us. So coming up the steps, oh, of course, get another madman's or wandering madness. He should have twins, enough to upgrade the weapon for the first tier. And this might be a better place to like get a look at them. Filled with skulls, and when we hit them, they kind of have like a hollow sound and like bleed a blackish kind of mist, which I think could be kind of related to the black mist which coats like the beckoning bell and all that kind of thing. And I'll talk a lot more about that as the playthrough progresses. Coming up to this next area, we will have some snatchers. I think the other one already like walked to where we're supposed to go. And then the lantern for the Hypogean Gaol. So with this we can access the Hunter's Dream again and leave this area and go back to the Cathedral Ward. But there's a lot of cool information to be found here, so we're not going to do that quite yet. So this note is not held by messengers. It's just chilling on the ground here. It says, nightmarish rituals crave a newborn. Find one and silence its harrowing cry. If you're not terribly familiar with Bloodborne, you might think at like on your first playthrough that it's literally saying to just go find a baby and yeet it, essentially, just like silence it, just kill it. That's a pretty terrible thing, I think, too. Just like leave as it is in the game. The Japanese for it is a lot clearer in my opinion. It's more like where is it? The nightmare ritual is with the infant. Find the infant. Please stop its crying voice. And so it's not just like any random infant. It's a nightmare infant, and that's supposed to be a reference to Murgo, which is kind of like the catalyst, which is causing the events of the night to transpire as they are. And I'll talk a lot about that once we get further along in the game, and once we get this item kind of being hoarded by these two snatchers over here. Trying not to get both of them aggroed on me, because they're pretty hard to deal with. Oh, no, no, no. So these guys will have like this kind of a buff attack that they will do once you deplete, like maybe it's about a third of their HP, and it leaves them open for a little bit, which is enough time to get a visceral off generally. So it's a pretty good method to try to fish for those kind of viscerals when you get that opportunity. Sometimes they'll attack immediately after though. Okay, so that's that buff, and that'll cause them to become a lot faster and a lot more aggressive with their attacks, and a lot more fluid with their movement. So it's important to try to like kill them before that becomes a problem. And they drop bloodstone shards pretty often, and so from this corpse right here, we get a very significant item, in my opinion, for like trying to understand the overall message of Yahar'gul, although it's a little bit hard to pick up on. We get the moon rune. It says it's a secret symbol left by Carol, the runesmith of Bergenworth. It's a transcription of moon as spoken by the Great Ones inhabiting the nightmare. Gain more blood echoes. The Great Ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon. So one of the most important points of this this description here is in Japanese. It talks about like the Great Ones will respond to the crying of voices of those, or they will respond to the voices of those who call out. And so I think for this description, the important takeaway was supposed to be like this voice idea is supposed to have been connected to this note here, and that it talks about the nightmare infant's crying voice. And so the Great Ones of the nightmare are responding to the crying voice of this newborn. And so with that out of the way, I will talk a bit more about like the description in general. In Japanese, there's a really frustrating trend to not denote whether something is singular or plural. So it's a bit unclear on its own whether or not it's supposed to be talking about one Nightmare Great One or multiple Nightmare Great Ones. I think it's possible to interpret it multiple ways in that if you believe like the Nightmare Great One to just be a singular reference to the moon presence, I could support that idea. If you think there are multiple Nightmare Great Ones, I think that can also be supported because once you kill like Murgo's Wet Nurse or the Orphan of Cause, you'll also get like the Nightmare Slain from them as well. I think the way that I personally like to read this is that it's a singular reference to the moon presence because it seems as though like the moon presence is the one that's being attracted to Murgo and like the real problematic one. By thinking that the moon rune is more closely related to the moon presence, it gives us what's the word? Reason to kind of think that kind of lost my train of thought right now. If the moon rune is only related to the moon presence, it would kind of work on a thematic level for reinforcing that the idea of paled blood is blood that's been drained of something, because the moon rune allows one to drain more blood echoes from their enemies. And I don't think that interpretation is very straightforward at all. The only reason why I was able to even come to that conclusion was because of one of the interviews from Hidetaka Miyazaki, where his Drained of Blood interview reveals to us that this lore note that we're about to come up upon is supposed to show like that the sky was drained of blood, and that's why it's purple later on in the game. But at this point in the game, oh, I forgot about the eye collector. Yeah, that's what I get for getting too in the zone. Sundry says, would you happen to know why they chose the jail spelling? Probably just to make it sound a bit more Victorian and a bit more gothic. They did use a bit antiquated language in general, like instead of saying mercury, they say quicksilver. So it's a pretty consistent theme in the game. Some more twins, which is definitely nice for this part of the game. Oh, thought I was going to be able to sidestep that. I'm probably gonna die actually. Did I live? No, okay. So those little women are called eye collectors. As you can see, they will gouge out the player's eyes if they get grabbed by them. It's a pretty cool attack. Definitely a bit rare, and that becomes a bit relevant because they will often drop pebbles, so that helps reinforce the idea that pebbles may have come from eyes. is like dealing with a Black Knight in Dark Souls. Unfortunately, you don't get the easy backstabs. I was trying not to get kicked in the face, but didn't quite work out. And like I said before, like they drop pebbles pretty frequently. And since they collect eyes, could be a common connection. So we get another man-eater pig. Oh god. Doing the unholy technique of the hunter and visceraling the pig. Sparing us the second one. So as I was saying earlier before I got killed by my own hubris, Hidetaka Miyazaki had mentioned like the note here was supposed to eventually reveal, like once the blood moon was revealed, that the pale blood sky was supposed to signify like a sky that had been like drained of blood. And so one idea along with that could be like since it becomes purple later on and the moon itself becomes red, perhaps like the moon was draining the blood out of the sky, just like apparently how a sky sorry, I'm phrasing this terribly right now. Is this guy not here yet? That the sky is supposed to look like a corpse drained of blood. I'm not terribly familiar with how that looks in real life, but I suppose a drained corpse is purplish in color. So we get some more frenzied cold blood. And then we heard a pig stomping around earlier. And coming out into Yahar'gul, we have like beauty carriages that have like cages on them and iron bars, and many of them have been destroyed. It's unclear by what. We get the black Yahar'gul set. Perhaps like one of the pigs broke out of these things, because we've got the pigs roaming about as well. It's a little bit unclear. So before looking at these corpses, we're going to look at the new armor set. So it starts with a black hooded iron helm, and it seems like only these two are different. And the iron helmet worn by hunters of the Unseen Village. The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers wear their black hoods low to shadow their eyes. This helm is made of metal, a rarity for hunter garb, and has the high defense, but only against physical attacks. Perhaps one of the reasons why this hood will cover their eyes could be to hide the fact that they themselves may have been inflicted by the Scourge of Beasts. Someone in our last lore through had brought that up as a possibility, and I liked it, so I'm going to go ahead and mention that now. So, the black garb itself is thick black pullover worn by hunters of the Unseen Village. The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers blend into the night wearing this attire. Designed primarily to defend from physical attacks, the binding of thick rope serves both to protect its wearer and to restrain its foes. The Japanese for that reveals like the rope is supposed to be like a kind of a charm, essentially. Maybe it's supposed to defend against some magical attacks. Not fully sure, but it is consistent. Like they will restrain the people that they come into contact with the ropes that are used on this attire. And these do have a good physical resistance as well. And I think everything else is pretty straightforward. This does reveal that the School of Mensis is controlling Yahar'gul, and it seems as though the hunters in this employed by the School of Mensis have been kidnapping people for quite some time, even before like tonight, most likely. And I think this also reveals like it's not limited to snatchers who have been working on collecting the people and putting them into the jail. Okay. So, coming up to this gate here, we find a bunch of corpses that seem to be like prostrated almost. And I don't think it's really like that big a deal that they're wearing like the black church set. A lot of the corpses kind of reuse the same assets, but at least for this area, it might be a bit relevant because we know that like the School of Menses have been conducting like these nightmarish rituals to beckon the moon. And from all these corpses, we get man's knowledges. One idea that I have would be since like the rituals are ongoing, and there's a lot of like cosmic horror type stuff going on in this area. They might have been inflicted by frenzy, which is why they have these madman's knowledges. They've come into contact with the supernatural, which is why they've been blessed with that kind of wisdom. And that idea gets a bit more supported like when you go to the bridge in the Nightmare of Mensis and encounter the Brain of Mensis, and all the corpses around it will have like tons of Great One's wisdoms. Damn it, got me in the dodge animation. I feel so 50-50 with the pigs. It's like either they're a breeze or they just kind of get you at the old razzle dazzle. I probably shouldn't have done it this way. I wish these guys walked a little bit faster before they became enraged. Thank you. That's not good. I thought I was a little bit too far away. not so tough without your walls, are you? I was trying to jump. There we go. So from this corpse over here, we get some bolt paper. This is coarse paper that applies bolt to weapons when rubbed. Invented by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church workshop, artificially recreates the blue sparks that are said to surround dark beasts. Unlike the other strange weapons created by Archibald, this one was favored by many hunters, in particular those who had even once laid eyes on a dark beast. This will tie into the item we're about to get a little bit further on, the Tonitrus. Oh god. It's annoying. I should have just went with the normal version of it. Oh, wow. Oh, there goes like 20,000 echoes. So Yahar'gul is a little bit challenging at this point in the game. It's not too terrible if you're playing better. Oh, no, no. So yeah, as you can see, they become a lot faster. They'll like run towards the player, and they become more explosive in their attacks. Sorry I'm playing so unoptimally right now. Did not want to spend this much time on the trash mobs of Yahar'gul. was going to hold off on talking about it, but I think I will go ahead and just do that now, since I'm just kind of repeating content. In the Hypogean Gaol, you do have some like much different statues in this area compared to all of the other areas of the game. We haven't seen it directly yet in this playthrough, but this figure at the very center of this cathedral is that of an amygdala. This is one of the things which grabbed us and inflicted frenzy upon us in the cathedral ward. This is a statue of a great one. It's got like a small hollow cavity in the middle of its chest, and the inside of its like kind of head is lined with a bunch of eyes, although we will discover that more for ourselves later on. Below the statue of the amygdala, we've got a child-sized mummy that seems to have a kind of cage on its head, which could signify to me that the children of the orphanage were used by the School of Mensis, or maybe there might not have been as much of a rift as some people believe. Although I think there might be like kind of shackles on some of them. Maybe not on these ones. There might be just like the puppets of Mikolash. We've kind of got these statues of what look to be like celestial larvae, but they don't like match up one to one. Like they're a little bit more like developed perhaps in their life cycles. And then we've got the common Yarnum and Thumerian statue that's got like skeletal figures climbing up on it. So it seems like the School of Mensa seems to venerate both like celestial emissaries, these things, and the amygdalas. We'll find out a little bit more about that later, but not a ton. Actually turned around. Oh, no, not like this. Come on. Nope, screwed that up. Probably just try to visceral, like more of the normal style attacks. That seems to be working out a little bit better so far. That was kind of garbage. Alright, screw all that. I'm just gonna like run past everything at this point. So there is a kind of like a shortcut door which I forgot to open on the side of the chapel, so you can just kind of ignore the snatchers and the woman. I probably should have killed her first. So she screwed up me killing the madness, so that's not too terrible. So coming up to this snatcher over here, it's kind of flanked by a couple dogs. So I like to try to take those out with a Molotov cocktail if I can. And he doesn't seem to care whatsoever. Which works out for me. Alright, and so we finally get that other item that I talked about so long ago. That's nitrous. It is a unique trick weapon contrived by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church workshop. Striking this peculiar iron morning star flail like a match generates the same blue sparks that blanket a dark beast. Unfortunately, for reasons untold, the hunters of Archibald's time did not truly take to the device. I believe that this is supposed to be inspired by a Tesla coil. Let me just double check everything. So it does set up that Archibald was an eccentric of the Healing Church workshop. One note about that term for eccentric is very often it can be used interchangeably with like heretic. So it's a little bit confusing as to whether or not Archibald is affiliated with the Healing Church itself, or if he like renounced ties to the Healing Church later on. it could just be that maybe he is eccentric as far as the healing church is concerned. I think we should double check where the Tonitrus belongs in storage to get like a bit of a more definitive case as to how we should interpret it, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. And so we were able to open up a kind of other, not so much of a shortcut area right here, but it leads to like a kind of alternate path into the jail. So this snatcher is also flanked by 2 dogs. I don't know why it's not trying to come at me. I don't want to deal with a snatcher and a dog at once. So that worked out. Just it annoys me how time consuming it is to kite some of the enemies away. Some more frenzied cold blood. And twin bloodstone shards. This is the kind of a not so shortcut door that I was talking about. This doesn't really lead to a different area, it's just another avenue. And once we open this door, there will be a couple eye collectors that scurry about. Some very, very lovely screams going on right there. And so this room down here is filled with like a bunch of like kind of docile Yarnamites. Until you get too close to them, they'll kind of stand up. They seem to be out of their sorts. I do like they're in like they're kind of like pajama looking, wearing different attire than what we've seen them in so far. These men are already transformed. They've got the elongated left arms and the normal right arms. So it seems as though the hulking brutes, the kidnappers, brought them here as well. And speaking of kidnappers, to support that claim, we've got 2 of them chilling in this room behind. So I'm not going to deal with those quite yet. I'm just probably going to clear out this little room and then return to the dream, level up my weapon and my character, and then deal with the boss of this area. Let's go with her first.
Welcome. What is it? Very well. Over time, it. Farewell, good hunter. May.
Able to upgrade it twice, which is really nice. And no more gems. Maybe Gehrman will be chilling back here. No dice. Okay. So the Hypogean Gaol, which I had mentioned before, uses a different kind of different location stone. They all say awaken above ground, and I don't think there's like a ton of significance between like where they're situated, but the last one will be like pretty much exclusive for the nightmares. It does confuse me that the abandoned old workshop warp is also included with the Yahar'gul one and not like in the ones centered around like Cathedral Ward and Central Yarnum though. So I completely forgot to open the shortcut, which is exactly what I wanted to do. Because I was going to go and get that Wandering Madness, which got away from us. Alright, so this is the shortcut which I've forgotten about a few times, and now with all that being done, we'll just go down to face the Dark Beast Parl and show off where the area matches up. So we see the little eye collector scaring off. It goes to the left and really makes it a good trap for the player because there's another one just waiting to catch you off guard on the right. Did it just go outside? Okay. So we've gotten the attention of one of those snatchers in that back room. This is probably not good. So there's not a whole lot going down here either. There are some tables and chairs and like the incense urns and the mirrors as well. So that's pretty much it for the Hypogean Gaol at this point in the game in Yahar'gul. A lot of people do wonder whether or not there's a correlation between like there being mirrors and ways to access the dream. There is probably a good reason to believe that, and I'll talk about that probably more when we encounter Mikolash. I don't really summon guys very often, so may as well just do it now. Like, Parl isn't too bad, and watch me die for just saying this. So this is Defector Antal, and a lot of people wonder why, if he's a defector of like the School of Mensis, why he would be down here. If you complete the DLC Research Hall area first, before coming down here, I think you could also summon Yamamura. And one of the reasons why we think that Antal is part of the School of Mensis is he's wearing the Yahar'gul set, which mentions that they answer to the School of Mensis, the village's founders. So coming over here, we find a pile of bones, which is a Dark Beast Parl, and it will be blanketed with that kind of electricity that was mentioned with relation to Archibald's items. Oh no, it's not good. Okay, I lived. Thank you, Antal. You actually did good. You did well. Like, once you break Parl's limbs, you can cause its lightning to go away for a little bit. And they're pretty easy to break at this point in the game. Like, if you fight it in the Chalice dungeons, it's a lot harder to kill. I think it might have had like a bit more health because of the cooperator, but It's really not that bad of a fight. And so once you defeat the enemies, they will return to their own world. And with Dark Beast Parl defeated, we can gain access to that door which leads back into Old Yarnum. And defeating Parl also gave us the Spark Hunter badge. So when we go back to the Hunter's Dream, I'll try to show off what new items have been added to the store for us. I forgot to check after we got Ludwig's items, or the Radiant Sword Hunter badge, what items were in the shop as well. So. This badge is crafted in secret by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church, for his friends. Archibald was fascinated by blue sparks that emanate from the hides of the dark beasts and dedicated his life to its artificial reproduction in a style of inquiry that, incidentally, closely followed the methodology of Bergenworth. So it's a little bit curious what it means by that methodology of Bergenworth and its style of inquiry. Because it seems like for the most part, at least for the Healing Church, the style of inquiry is a bit more direct and hands-on, and like infecting people with like phantasms, or like pouring water into people's heads, having them become exposed to beast blood and the beast Carol rune potentially. So. How he was able to recreate this is a bit of a mystery. Some people believe that it's related to like the kind of static electricity of like the bones moving around, and that's a bit more supported when we like find the Lauren Silver Beast, which also have electric style attacks, because we can find that their claws and things will extend on their own, and like the bones in their body kind of move as well. So. That's one possible explanation, although we could all just always just wave our hands at the end and then end of the day and say, ooh, like magic. So that's that. And the messenger bath with the new items. We get the bolt paper from the Spark Hunter badge. The Bone Marrow Ash, I don't think I've read this yet, actually. So this is an additional medium that strengthens Quicksilver bullets. According to the workshop, this is a special Bone Marrow Ash collected from Hemwick Charnel Lane, invaluable to hunters with weak blood tinge who require the use of stronger firearms. Bone Marrow is a combustible in real life. It was used for like fires and explosions. Much earlier in history, we have better methods of making that happen now, or I mean, I'm sure it's still used to an extent, but just not nearly as widely as it used to be. So that item is kind of inspired from like real life chemistry. What else? We get the Ludwig's Holy Blade as a reward for the Radiant Sword Hunter badge, and it's a trick weapon typically used by Healing Church hunters. It is said that the silver sword was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the church. When transformed, it combines with its sheath to form a greatsword. The Healing Church workshop began with Ludwig and departed from the old Gehrman's techniques to provide hunters with the means to hunt more terrifying beasts, and perhaps things still worse. I don't remember if it was the Holy Blade or his rifle which had the altering text. Let me double check. So the Japanese for this one is pretty similar. The only like slight difference would be like the very final line is in order to hunt fearsome beasts or abominations. I do like how the English sets it up as a bit more mysterious, and it could be a potential reference to things like brain suckers or even great ones, if the note in the lecture hall about hunting great ones is of any hint as to what this could be referring to. I don't think I looked at the stake driver after we got the powder keg hunter badge either. So this is a trick weapon fashioned by the workshop heretics, the powder kegs, favored by the retired hunter Jura. The stake driver, with its queerly complex design, violently drives thick stakes into the flesh of foes. The stake driver allows for high damage, critical attacks, but is difficult to use and leaves its wielder wide open, but none of this should bother a mere powder keg. Just a note on its name, like in Japanese, instead of stake driver, it's pile driver. I do like that they called this the stake driver instead, though, because I think for like a lot of Americans at least, like a pile driver is more associated with like a kind of wrestling move, and saying stake driver instead also like keeps up with that thematic relevance of like vampires and werewolves. So it's got a pretty good imagery attached to like driving a stake through a heart of a vampire versus like the explosive nature of this weapon. I think it works out pretty well. The last part of the final paragraph is a little bit different. The English gives it a bit more style, whereas the Japanese is a bit more plain, and it says like things that are difficult to use may have been part of the way of the life of the gunpowder kegs. So just a bit of a flavor difference, but semantically similar. And I think that's it for this. Keep doing that. And so, okay, that's all the right-handed weapons. So with the left-handed ones, we get the Ludwig's rifle. It's a rifle typically used by healing church hunters. It is said that this rifle was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the church. Its long, heavy barrel makes up in range for what it lacks in reload speed. Ludwig's rifle exhibits several departures from the workshop's design, suggesting that the church anticipated much larger inhuman beasts. So I think that is the one where there's a difference in the Japanese, and so like on David Christie's webpage on GameFAQs, where he does have the or Game FAQs, where he has the Bloodborne Lore Translation Guide, you can see that there are like a different descriptions in English for one of the earlier build versions of these items. And so let me just try to look at those real quick here. Okay, so the older version of the Holy Blade says it is a... Hold on, let me just pull that up actually. So I'll just go ahead and read this whole description. So, it's a trick weapon typically used by healing church hunters. It is said that the silver sword was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the church. When transformed, it combines with its sheath to form a greatsword. It exhibits several departures from the workshop's design, suggesting that the church anticipated much larger inhuman beasts, which completely lines up with what we find with this current version of the Ludwig's rifle. So there are like some updates that did make it into the final version of the English, but it's just a bit weird, like how that kind of all came together in the final version of the game, I think. And then the Ludwig Radiant Sword Hunter badge also granted us access to the Tomb Prospector set. So this is attire of tomb prospectors who explore the old labyrinth on behalf of the Healing Church. The Healing Church traces its roots to Bergenworth and is therefore aware of the ruins' true importance. They contain much more than mere hunter trinkets indeed. They hide the very secrets of the old Great Ones, sought after by those with the insight to imagine greatness. I think there were a few differences in the set description there. Of course, Tomb Prospector is a bit of a nicer way of saying the Grave Robber set, and the Japanese, it is a pretty literally like the grave robbing set. So I do like the naming difference, because the Tomb Prospector makes it sound a bit more related to like archaeology or something a little bit more high class. Although I suppose you could say like, well, maybe it should have saved the grave robber set just to kind of show like how messed up the Healing Church has always been and how Bergenworth has always been. I can see arguments going for that either way. So okay, yeah. So the final paragraph in Japanese is a bit closer to, they are not simply a hideaway of treasures that can become the strength of hunters. They are a path of research to try and encounter the arcane of superior beings. And so I know that doesn't flow very well into English, and there are some like semantic linguistic concerns with the Japanese of this. They use this kanji, which is typically used for like being able to see something like mieru, but Patches also uses like some of the same kanji for one of his dialogues, and he uses a more archaic version of it, which is mamieru, which is along the lines of to encounter or have audience with or to confront something. And so that could have been the case in that final line. And so like the uh, the whole message behind this, I think, would be that the prospectors going down into the labyrinth would come into contact with the supernatural forces of like great ones, and that would drive them into going mad. And it's something that like Bergenworth wanted to research, and I think that gets tied into like how the Kin Goldblood and like the Augur of Abritus talk about how it's the Eldritch Truth touched upon by Bergenworth long ago. That term for Eldritch Truth is, of course, synonymous with the arcane stat, as I've mentioned time and time again. And so the rest of the set is the same. Right, and that should be about it. We got the rope Molotov cocktail, and it does have a bit of a different description than the regular one, and you get this from the powder keg workshop badge. This is an exploding Molotov cocktail that is thrown behind, allows for more maneuvering compared to an ordinary Molotov cocktail, and can catch foes off guard. Since the tragedy that struck Old Yarnum, fire has become a staple in beast hunts and is thought to cleanse impurity. Certain types of beasts have an abnormal fear of flame. The last line is repeated between them, but there's not a whole lot to say about that, really.
Welcome home. What is... Very well. Farewell, good hunter.
Gammon is still missing, and we're missing a couple more shards. But with Yahar'gul out of the way, a lot of the areas become easy to deal with. Oh, we found Gammon. I wonder if it's related to Parl being defeated.
Oh, Lawrence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid. Oh.
So that's like one half of Gehrman's dialogue, where he implores Lawrence to help him pretty much become freed from the dream, and hopefully we'll be able to get his second set of that dialogue later as well. So I think for now, I normally want to try to stream for about 3 hours, and we're close to that mark. And I normally go over, but this is a pretty good transition point into exploring like Cathedral Ward and Hammock Charnel Lane. So I think I'm going to go ahead and end it for tonight. So I do want to thank everybody who stopped in and commented as normal. If you're interested in talking more lore, I've got the Discord set up. And I do upload these onto YouTube as well if you missed part of the stream and want to catch it later. So thanks for stopping by, and have a good night.